Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, and online too. Before we really get started, I also would like to let people know that we have a hike tomorrow at Casper's, and you're all welcome. The exact route is to be determined based on a scout tomorrow morning on how much water are in the creeks. So we do not want to make the creek crossings too bad. So tonight we have three presenters, all on the theme of living with an antique, with an EV, my other cat. First one will be Ed Maurer, who has a Chevy Bolt EUV. Then we'll have Carl Goodman with his Mustang Mach-E, and then I will actually follow up third with our experiences with our Ioniq 5. So at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Ed Maurer.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you for letting me talk about our EV experience. Welcome, everybody. And if you could go to slide 1. I'm Ed Maurer, and I have been a Sierra Club member for over 40 years, mostly because Helen, my wife, signed us up. Both of us lead Sierra Club local hikes, and once a year we take a group hiking in Europe with another company. Helen and I have owned the Chevy Bolt EUV, the slightly larger brother of the plain Bolt EV, since January 2023. We also have solar panels on our roof, a heat pump water heater, and a level 2 charger in our garage. When our previous car, a smart car made by Mercedes, was totaled in late December 2022, we had already decided that our next vehicle would be an electric car. I had already put down a deposit on a Volkswagen ID, but when it arrived at the dealers, the sticker was $10,000 higher than I anticipated, and I canceled the order. In January 23, the Chevy Bolt was the hot economy EV, and we bought it at the premium. The following summer turned out to be the hottest on earth in 2,000 years. It seems it was high time we got an EV. Slide 2. For an economy car, our Bolt EUV provides a smooth, quiet ride, and charging it at home is incredibly convenient and inexpensive. We mostly charge the car at home at the cost of at an average of $35 a month. Going on a longer trip remains a challenge, as the network of charging stations remains inadequate despite all the grandiose announcements from federal and state officials and all the gazillions supposedly spent on EV charging stations. GM had indicated that they would end production of the Bolt, but when sales surged, GM decided to overhaul the car instead. CEO Mary Barra said that a revised Bolt will have better batteries, a Tesla-style charging port, new motors, and software. GM hasn't said yet when the new Bolt will arrive. Whether this new and improved Bolt will be as good as the one we have remains to be seen. Slide 3. Here is some good and important news. During 37 days in March and April of this year, California generated sufficient electric power from renewable sources to exceed all our needs. Granted, this was during our cool weather, but it means that during these 30 days, EV owners emitted hardly any GHGs because gas and coal-fired plants were not needed. A vital and new part of this scenario also is battery storage. It's important to know that for the first time, battery storage was the largest source of supply to power off the grid during critical times of the day, meaning in the morning before solar comes on, and in the late afternoon when solar begins to go off. The fact is, there is already enough capacity from renewables to go around in California on certain days. In the future, there will be enough to obviate polluting power sources. I bring this up because the supposed dearth of electricity is bandied about by EV skeptics. Slide 4, please. Skeptical stories often originate in the fossil fuel industry. Their hosts in Russia, Texas, the Gulf states, and others. Slide 5. In California, the national leader in electric cars with about 1 million plug-in vehicles, 36% of the US total on the road, EV charging currently accounts for less than 1% of the grid's total load during peak hours. In 2030, when the number of EVs in California is expected to surpass 5 million, according to predictions, I have my doubts, charging is projected to account for less than 5% of that load. In other words, EVs use up an insignificant portion of the electricity produced. Don't be afraid that all these EVs will get us brownouts or anything of that sort. Hang on. Okay, I think I need to slide 6. However, slide 6. It's certainly true that EVs have a 900-pound battery block with about 353 pounds of nasty metals, including cobalt, nickel, lithium, etc. Gas cars don't have that, and that makes them clean. But as soon as they hit the road, the gas cars, their GHG emissions are California's biggest cause of human-induced climate change. By contrast, once an EV is made, it's way cleaner than any fossil fuel car. This chart illustrates rather poorly cradle-to-grave GHG emissions for SUVs, EUVs, and some gas cars. Unfortunately, the people who put this chart together used the color green to show GHG emissions. And you'll see that EVs, especially small ones, emit much less harmful gases over the lifetime, but I don't know what kind of energy mix is the base for this chart. The gist of the chart, though, is that it shows that over the lifetime of an EV, it causes a fraction of harmful GHG emissions than a car with an internal or infernal combustion engine. Slide 7. We're also warned about how great a fire danger EVs represent. All the data show that EVs are much less likely to catch fire than their gas equivalent. However, there's a quote, "There is also a definite puzzle for firefighters, as battery fires require more water to put out, can burn almost 3 times hotter, and are more likely to reignite," according to the EV Fire Safe website. Slide 8. Range anxiety is a problem for prospective EV buyers. But as long as you can put a level 2 charger in your garage and or have easy access to public chargers, you're good to go for most of the time. Did you know, by the way, that in Irvine there are over 900 publicly accessible chargers? And that's one of the best cities in the state. A lengthy road trip, especially if you head off into the Tules, as Sierra Club members are bound to do, requires some planning. A while ago, we spent a few days in the Anza Borrego Desert, and thanks to Todd Fitch's good advice, we reserved a camping site with a hookup, where a level 2 outlet was part of the reserved space. If that wouldn't have been there, we would have been up the creek, because the next charger was in El Centro. But anyway, range anxiety vanished very quickly. Slide 9. Yes, EVs are still more expensive to buy than equivalent gas cars, although tax credits and rebates do make some models competitive. However, fuel and operational costs are way lower, which means that the cost of owning and operating an EV are lower over the long run. But the upfront cost is a problem, especially since 80% of consumers who buy a new car opt for a car loan, which at current usurious interest rates is very expensive. In my opinion, President Biden made a disastrous decision the other day when he slapped a 100% tariff on all Chinese EVs. If we allowed Chinese EVs selling for less than, say, $18,000, low and moderate income people could acquire EVs. But Washington fears that these cars may threaten UAW jobs and thus an important part of the Biden coalition. I think that American automakers and car dealers have no interest whatsoever in making and selling cheap cars, and since there's not much profit in such a product. The little car pictured here was first offered in China for an unbelievable $5,000. But reviewers looked at it and said it's a piece of crap. Admittedly, a piece of junk. And they came out with a new one for $10,000, and this one now is barely acceptable. But for 10 grand, I think most college students going to school in public transit deserts, like Orange County, they wouldn't mind. Clearly, protecting the domestic car industry seems to be more important than meeting the climate challenge. We and future generations will pay dearly for putting short-term concerns above dealing with the climate crisis. Slide 10. During a discussion of spiking home insurance premiums, I recently heard the former California Insurance Commissioner Dave Jones say, quote, "If you want to keep your future premiums from skyrocketing, do something about climate change, buy an EV." I couldn't agree more. EVs are environmentally, financially, and morally the right choice for a new car. Slide 11. We in the Sierra Club are proud protectors of the environment. Let's see whether members financially able to do something important about the environment and reduce their GHG footprint in a big way can reduce their GHG footprint in a big way. Let's stop talking the talk and walk the walk and get an EV soon. Next slide. Oh, yeah, here we are. There was to be a question period now, but it will happen at the end of the third presentation, and at that time we'll all have pleasure to ask questions. But now I have to introduce the next speaker, Carl, nomen est omen Goodman, a good man with an EV.
Well, I have been a Sierra Club member for 35 years, so not quite as good as you. I'm happy to be here to talk about my EV. I purchased a 2021 Ford Mustang Mach-E 3 years ago this month. And you will hear me make some criticisms of my vehicle, but I do want to emphasize that overall I am very happy with it, and I would buy it again, and I will never go back to a gas car. Slide 1. When you buy an EV, you take delivery, you drive it home from the dealer. The first thing you have to figure out is, how am I going to charge it? So for the first 2 weeks, I just plugged it into the 120 volt outlet in my garage, which is very slow. And it became apparent quite soon that that was not going to work for me for very long. So I arranged for an electrician to put in a 240 volt outlet in my garage. And this would enable level 2 charging. And that cost me $469. And luckily, I had a lot of space in my electrical panel, because if you have to expand your electrical panel, that can get quite expensive when you are putting in a 240 volt outlet. And I used a Ford mobile charger that came with my vehicle to charge the Mach-E. And most people like to get a dedicated charger, but I have not done that yet. It's worked well for me the way that it is. Ford put together a app on the phone called Ford Pass, and they did a very good job with it. And on that app, you can set your preferred charging times and preferred charging levels for your car. And so in my case, I charge between midnight and about 8 o'clock in the morning. And San Diego Gas and Electric, the cheapest time to charge is between those hours. And I can charge to 80% in less than 8 hours. So that has worked well for me. Next slide. In 2020, I put solar panels on my roof, and 27 solar panels. It cost me $21,000. And in last year, the cost, all my electrical costs for the house and to charge my vehicle came to $200 for the year. So I was quite happy with that, and I felt like that worked well for our family. Next slide. 5 months after I bought the car, it would not charge, and I got this charge fault error. And so I decided to take it down to the Ford dealership. Luckily, I still had enough battery to do that. And it took them 10 days to figure out what the problem was with the battery. And my impression is that the technicians at the Ford, I went to Capistrano Ford, and that the technicians that they have, they're just not that familiar with electric cars. And they're kind of slow on getting their people trained for the maintenance. And so they finally determined that it would need a replacement of the secondary onboard module. And in total, it took them 23 days to get my car back in repair. But once I got it back, it worked out just fine, and I haven't had any more problems with it. Not all Ford service shops are the same. And I have been taking my vehicle to Santa Margarita Ford. They seem to be doing a better job for me, and I think their training of their technicians is better. So I've been happy there. Okay, next slide. You may be aware that tires wear faster on an EV. And I replaced the tires on my Mach-E after 23,000 miles on the original tires. And so I'm on my second set of tires. I've put 32,000 miles on the car so far. Next slide. When I decided to buy an EV, I started out, I put a deposit down on a Tesla Model 3, then I put a deposit down on a Audi e-tron, and then on the Ford Mustang Mach-E. And so I was committed to buying an EV, but it took a while for me to do it. I had been looking at them for several years before I actually bought one. So my objective was to get into an EV for a reasonable cost. And so I was not concerned about getting a really large battery. My Mach-E came with 68 kilowatt hour usable battery, which is on the small side, really. And it was rated by the EPA for 230 miles, which would be fine for my day-to-day normal use. I only drive about 30 miles a day normally. However, what I discovered was that the real-world range for my vehicle is only about 200 miles on a road trip. And so after the road trips that I have done, I have decided that I would not go beyond 150 miles between charges, and that's mainly to avoid range anxiety, which I'm a little bit of an anxious person anyway. So that was something I wanted to avoid. And so the range that came with my vehicle, it's not enough. And I'm looking for a vehicle that has EPA rated range of over 300 miles for my next EV. Next slide. When I bought my EV, I wasn't paying that much attention to the charging speed. And I purchased the Mach-E Select, which is the base model, and it has a charging speed up to 115 kilowatts for fast charging. And when I charge, I often will charge for 45 to 50 minutes. Now, sometimes that's just fine. Sometimes you stop at a restaurant, you go to the restroom, you come back out, and your car is charged to 80% or more. However, that's not always the case, and 45 to 50 minutes is still kind of a long time to charge. Now, there is a Mach-E with a larger battery, and that charges at a rate of 150 kilowatts. And, you know, if I could go back in time, I would buy that one. But, next slide. But still, it has worked out well for me. When I started researching EVs, I started getting on the online forums. And there are a lot of really good online forums for EV vehicles. In the case, there's a Mach-E forum on the internet that I have used quite a bit when I was doing research and when I was figuring out some of the issues with my car. And I think the Bolt I noticed has an online forum, and I'm sure Hyundai has one too. Next slide. I have done 7 road trips in the last 3 years. I really enjoyed the road trip to Monterey and to Yosemite. And I've done Las Vegas 3 times, and I've done 2 round trips to Utah that were a little more challenging. Next slide. So charging delays are common. And all 7 road trips that I have done, I would call successful. I haven't been stranded anywhere. I've always been able to get to a charger. Most of the time, I was able to find a charger quite easily. Several times, I have had to wait 20 minutes to get onto a charger. And 3 times in Las Vegas, I have had to go to a different charging station to find an open charger. What will happen in Las Vegas is you'll show up at that Electrify America at the South Outlet Mall, and there will be, all the chargers will be full, and there will be six or 8 cars in line to charge. And there's Las Vegas is kind of a problem for charging. My daughter lives in Henderson, and there's a charge point charger close to her house, and I've ended up using that one more just because there are fewer people trying to get onto it. So I have concluded that my vehicle is not great for long road trips. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. Now, I charge primarily at Electrify America and also at ChargePoint. And between those 2, I have been able to find a charging station pretty much everywhere that I have needed. And it's helpful to set up accounts with Electrify America and ChargePoint in advance of your road trip, and to load their apps on your phone before you go. And both Electrify America and ChargePoint apps will allow you to see how many chargers are available at a particular location. And so if we're on a road trip, I'll ask my wife to check out the apps, and we'll be about 10 minutes out from a charging station, and I'll ask her to look and see how many chargers are available. And so then I'll know whether or not to get off the freeway there. Now, driving between San Clemente and Las Vegas, I normally charge in either Barstow or at the Eddie's World in Yermo. And so I will look on the apps, and if one is full, then I'll look to see if there are chargers available at the other one. And so you can kind of, and that's helpful because it's really a pain to drive to one charging station and see that it's full and then just try another one. It's better to research that as you're going. Next slide. Oh, I wanted to talk about the worst EV road trip that I have ever done. I took my family and we went to Utah, where we have lots of, that's where I'm from, that's where we have lots of family in Utah. And so we decided to drive the 700 miles back from Utah in one day. Now, I have done that many times in a gas car. You know, and the way we do it is you just drive 80 miles an hour, you only stop a couple of times, and you know, you can do it in one day without too much trouble. In this case, we had 3 people in the car with luggage. It was a hot summer day. We had the air conditioning on full blast, and we were driving about 80 miles an hour. And those are all things that affect the range. And so our available range dropped to about 150 miles. We ended up stopping to charge 6 times, or basically once every 100 miles. And it took an extra 3 hours to get home as compared to a gas engine. This really soured my wife on long road trips in my car. I don't think I could get her to do it again. However, I do want to say that the road trips that we have done between 300 and 400 miles have worked out really well, and I've been happy with, mainly because you don't notice how much time you're charging as much. I particularly like the trip to Monterey because we've stopped at the premium outlets in Camarillo and the premium outlets in Pismo Beach, and while I'm charging, my wife can go shop. And so she didn't have complaints about that trip. Okay, next slide. So I think it takes a bit of an adventurous spirit and a commitment to the environment to take a long road trip relying on the current charging technology. It's really kind of a disappointing experience, at least for me. One has to carefully plan the trip in advance. You can't just wing it and expect to have a charging station when you run out of charge. And one of the best tools for planning the trip is a better route planner, which I think Todd will be talking about in his presentation. Next slide. So this is a conclusion or a recommendation. In my opinion, if the typical family has 2 vehicles, one of them should probably be a hybrid or plug-in hybrid gas vehicle. I just don't think for most people that it's just too difficult to get along with, let's say, 2 EVs. But I think having 1 EV and 1 gas engine car, I think that's kind of the sweet spot right now. That's kind of what works. And that provides the flexibility of a gas car for road trips when desired, or for those times when maybe you don't have time to charge your vehicle before you need to go somewhere. Now, there's the flip side of that is that I think that every household that has 2 cars, one of them should be an EV. I don't see any reason why people should not be willing to commit to 1 EV in a household of 2 cars. I think because you use the EV, you get the benefits of the EV, and the environment gets the benefits of the EV, and then you have a flexibility of the gas car at other times. I have found that driving an EV has worked out to less than half the cost of a gas engine, and so it does save money. At least that's been my experience to drive an EV. Next. Well, I wanted to talk about the active driving assistance systems. This is something that I have been very interested in. And my car came with Ford Blue Cruise, which is rated quite highly by Consumer Reports, not so much by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And it's a mixed experience. Next slide. Anyway, I really liked Ford Blue Cruise. I had a good experience with it. You can set the desired speed, turn on lane centering, set the desired following distance, and you can drive hands-free on the freeway. I was really happy with that. However, my wife tends to get car sick, and whenever I put the Blue Cruise on, she would start to get car sick, and it had to do with the acceleration and the brakes. And what would happen is that you set a certain speed, and then you see a car way up ahead, but the Blue Cruise is programmed to go at a certain speed until you get up to a certain following distance. So she can see the car up ahead. Our car is accelerating as we're getting closer to the car ahead. She's starting to freak out. Now, I know that when we get within a certain following distance that it's going to break us down and that we won't get any closer than the following distance that I have set. And so anyway, the combination of the acceleration and the braking during Blue Cruise really aggravates her motion sickness, and she really hates it. I understood how the system works and was fine with it. Now, I kind of shot myself in the foot. Whenever we went on a road trip, I would insist on using the Blue Cruise. And so if you ask my family about what do you think of Dad's EV, they would say, oh, I hate it, because they think that an EV and Blue Cruise are the same thing. And so they basically hate my EV because I insisted on using Blue Cruise every time we went on a road trip. And so these systems are not quite there yet. Ford offered me Blue Cruise for free for 2 years. I gave it up when they decided to charge me $600 for the next 3 years on a subscription basis. And so, unfortunately, we're seeing that a lot more, where anytime you have something on your car that you want to start using, they're going to charge you for it on a subscription basis. So anyway, those are the thoughts that I have. I'd like to turn it over to Todd now. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll start without having you see me. So why don't we just go to the next slide?
There's the mouse.
Yep, mouse is on that one. Okay. Okay, so my theme is basically, it's basically electric cars and electric car. It's the same as any other car, except it's different. And I'm going to focus on the primary differences, which were also covered to a certain extent by both Carl and Ed. And that's going to be charging and range. And next slide. The arrow doesn't work? Okay. Okay, so we have a 2022 Hyundai Ioniq 5 all-wheel drive. On my list, all-wheel drive was important because we have a cabin in the mountains. We like going skiing. I wanted the extra traction and ability to get around in the mountains. The car has a little bit bigger battery than I think the other people's cars. It has an EPA range of 256, which I'm going to get into EPA range in a minute. And we've had it for just about 2¼ years, and we've driven about 38,000 miles. So we've put some road under the tires. We've done trips to Santa Barbara, to Utah, northern Grand Canyon, several trips to Arizona, camping a couple times in the desert, and we have a cabin in the Los Padres, which is about a 300-mile round trip that we do quite often, which accounts for a lot of that mileage. Next slide. So all these things that are different really come down to the batteries, and battery technology is changing all the time. And if you listen to the pundits on the EV forums, they're always coming up with the next great thing, and who knows when it's going to be in a car. But for now, most of the batteries really don't want to be fully discharged and they don't want to go to 100% very often. In fact, the 100% that's on your car is not really 100%. The manufacturer brings it down some, and the same with 0. They bring it up a little bit. So they don't even give you the full theoretical range of the battery on their gauge. But they really are happier closer to the middle, and you're not likely in normal driving to go below 20%, and you're not likely in around town driving to ever need to take it above 80%. So you're really kind of working with 60% of your battery there. On a beginning of a road trip, no problem. Bring it up to 100% and take it down to 10% or 20%. So that first stop, especially on a road trip, you may have 80% of your battery to work with, but you don't really have 100%. Around town, you only have 60, 70% to work with, but that's okay because that's a lot of driving. And for us, that would be probably about a week's worth if we actually didn't plug in every day. Next slide. So when people talk about range, the mindset, at least for me coming from a gas car, and I think most people, is I don't worry about range around town, right? I might look at the gauge and say, yeah, I have enough to go to work today. I don't have to fill it up today. But the time you really worry about range is when you're on a road trip. And it turns out that's when an internal combustion engine car, or ICE as EV people call them, do the best. And they do the best for two reasons. One, they're slightly more efficient on the motor, but the real reason is because they're so horribly inefficient in town that anything is better than in town for them. Whereas an EV, or to a certain extent a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, typically does much better in town, so you see the effects of speed and wind resistance and weather on the road much more than you do in town. So your mindset coming from an internal combustion car is that I get good range on the highway and who cares too much about town other than it costs me more gas. And on an EV, it's like range matters on the highway. And I only get 60% of my battery to work with. So let's go to the next slide. And one of the things people always bandy about, like I did, our Ioniq 5 is rated at 256 miles on EPA range. But the EPA range is basically a meaningless thing to worry about. It's based on a mixture of driving. Not all of it, or not even a majority of that driving mix is highway. And their highway driving is at speeds that would be ridiculous to be using out west, like 50, 60 miles an hour. Okay? And speed kills range. So the EPA range is based on a driving mix that you don't do when you're on the highway. That's when you care about the range. And the EPA also assumes you're going to use 100% of your battery, which you're not going to do. So the only thing I would use the EPA range for is to do a comparison between vehicles. If I have a vehicle with a 200-mile EPA range and it's not enough for me, I know I want to look for one at 250 or 300. But don't expect to get 250 or 300 out of it. Next slide. And an internal combustion engine is, the cars are only 20 to 40% efficient for the amount of energy in the gasoline to what actually pushes you forward on a gas car. Only about 20 to 40% of that is getting to the wheels. So because of that, differences in road friction and weather and things like that are not as noticeable in a gas car because you're not using most of it to go forward anyway. You're using most of it to heat the planet. But in an EV, you really see these things. So when you go up a hill, you really notice it. But fortunately for an EV, when you go down the hill, you're refilling the tank. So I've actually found that in places where you're not going at super fast speeds, but you're going through mountainous terrain, by the time you get back to the starting elevation, you've done pretty darn well. You actually are almost as good as on flatland, and I cannot say that for a gas car. Gas cars are always worse in the mountain. Batteries become inefficient in colder weather. You're not going to do as well. Anything that changes the friction on the highway or provides a little resistance, like snow or rain is going to reduce your range. And wind makes a big difference. When you think about it, if you're driving into a headwind that's 20-mile-an-hour headwind, it's the same as driving 20 miles an hour faster. And the energy needed for that goes up as the square of the speed. If I double my speed, if I go from 40 miles an hour to 80, I don't use twice the energy, I use 4 times the energy. So wind makes a difference. If you got a tailwind, you're doing great. If you got a headwind, not so great. Next. Okay, the other side of batteries is how fast they can charge. And this one is, I think for a first-time car buyer, EV car buyer, is not something that's necessarily on their radar as being important. So every car has a maximum rate that they can charge at. One for AC and one for DC. For instance, the Bolt EUV is 50 kilowatts. Carl's car is, I think he said 115 kilowatts. Okay? Chargers have ratings. And what you're going to get into your car is the lesser of the two numbers. If I roll into a charging station with a car that can charge at 115 kilowatts and it's a 62 kilowatt charger, all I'm going to get is 62 kilowatts. And meanwhile, if you go to a gas station, you put the pump in, it doesn't, they're all the same. It doesn't matter. Next. So charging at home is typically AC charging, and you can plug into a regular household outlet. The maximum for that from a regular plug like on the wall here is really 1.4 kilowatts. And then anything 240 volts is considered level 2, but that's wide range. At our cabin, for instance, we have a 20 amp outlet because it was cheap and easy to put in. I can get 3.8 kilowatts out of that. Takes a long time to fill the battery, but we're there for a long time, so it's okay. But usually if you get an EV, you're putting something into your house that can charge at maybe 9 to 12 kilowatts. And that's enough to charge anything normal overnight. So you come home, you plug your car in, the next day you have a full tank. What I say by normal is we can't get around physics. A big pickup truck like Lightning, Ford Lightning pickup, or a Hummer EV, they are going to use horrible amount of electricity, and they're going to take a lot more to charge. But I don't think that's this crowd. Okay, let's go for the next slide. Okay, the charging on the road is where you really have the issue, because around town, you say every day you wake up with a fresh full tank of gas, and you never even had to go to the gas station. So around town, an EV is absolutely perfect. But on the road, things get more complicated. There are 4 standards out there right now. The older Asian cars use something called CHAdeMO, which only went up to 50 kilowatts. The only car I think currently being sold that still has that might be the Nissan Leaf, if the Nissan Leaf is still being sold. Everything else in the US other than Tesla has been using something called CCS, or Combined Charging Standard. So that's your second one. And the third one is the original Tesla stuff, which uses a CAN bus for communication. And now people are going to be migrating to what they're calling North American Charging Standard, which uses the Tesla connector, but uses the Combined Charging System, the CCS protocol, for communicating between the charger and the car. So older Teslas, owners of older Teslas can pay Tesla for a hardware upgrade, and the Tesla chargers, the newer version 3 Tesla chargers, can do both protocols. And now there are other companies. I was just reading that ChargePoint and EVgo are starting to roll out some chargers that have this North America Charging Standard plug on it. So anyway, the takeaway is if you buy a car today, it doesn't matter. You're going to be able to charge it indefinitely in the future. The difference between the North America Charging System that is the Tesla plug with CCS, and current cars like all of ours here, is that you'll need a little simple adapter to be able to plug in, and you'll be able to charge your car going forward, just like you might have a USB adapter from one style of USB plug to another. Okay, and plug and charge. I forgot to mention that. So the protocol allows, and both Ford and GM have implemented, but not Hyundai, something called plug and charge, where when you plug the cable into your car, the car identifies itself to the charger, it says who it is and who is going to pay the bill for this, and will automatically start charging. And then you get a bill at the end of the month. And you can go to Electrify America, or you can go to a Tesla with the adapter or whatever, it doesn't matter. You just plug in and it starts charging. But not all cars implement it, and not all charging networks implement it. So, next slide. There's a bunch of networks out there. EVgo was mentioned earlier. They're a big one. Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, Blink, Tesla, EV Connect, Shell Recharge, Rivian Adventure Network. There's a gazillion of these networks out there. And right now, without plug and charge especially, and not all of them support it, to use them, you're going to need the app for each of the networks, which is a real pain. Okay? The next thing is pricing, and I'll talk about cost to charge in a minute. When you roll off a freeway on a road trip in your gas car, there'll be 3 or 4 gas stations. They'll have a big sign. They'll have numbers on them saying what their cost per gallon is, and you can say, the Valero over here is 5 cents cheaper than the Shell. I'll go to that. And it doesn't matter which one you go to. But so far, the EV charging stations in North America don't have that. You roll off the freeway and you don't even see the charging station, much less a big sign saying they're going to charge you 75 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's the other thing you need the app for, just to figure out whether or not you want to pay their use prices. And then a lot of the charging in areas like Southern California, they've put the chargers where the power is, because it can take a long time to get power set up to a new location. For instance, somebody mentioned El Centro on this car camping thing. There's an Electrify America there that we've used a number of times. It's located in a Bank of America parking lot, about 2 or 3 miles from the freeway, with no indication that it's there. You got to use the apps to find it. So that means that you get off the freeway, you go a couple miles off on city streets. That can take a while. Do your charge. Turns out there's nothing by that B of A to get, there's not even a bathroom there. And then you get 2 or 3 miles back to the freeway. So the locations are not ideal. If you're doing the run to Las Vegas, I would recommend, like Carl, stay away from that Premium Outlet South in Vegas. But if you stop in Baker, there are both an EVgo, a Tesla which supports NACS, and a Electrify America, and they all are big stations with pull-through, with canopies, adjacent to restaurants and restrooms, and they're nice. If everything was like that, the world would be wonderful for traveling. But most locations aren't like Baker. Also, for the older charging stations, the different dispensers are different speeds. And if I roll in here with a really fast charging car, and the fast chargers are taken by slow charging cars, then it can be annoying. But maybe when they pulled up, that was the only charger available. So that's it. And they are not as reliable as you'd like, or not historically haven't been. One of the reasons why Ford decided to convince Tesla to open up their charging network is because they looked at the numbers, and Tesla had a 98% success rate on first plug-in to successful charge. Ford had been doing things through Electrify America, and Electrify America had like a 65 or 70% success rate. So if you think about rolling off of a freeway and getting to a gas station and finding that 30% of the time you couldn't get the gas pump to work, you'd probably forget going to that brand of gas and you'd go to a different one, right? So, but recently that's been improving because it's starting to make a difference for the business model. They need to be more reliable. Another one is these cables are really carrying a lot of power. I mean, you can power an entire neighborhood's lights off of some of these DC fast chargers. So the cables are big, they're stiff, they often have liquid cooling in them, and that means they also make them fairly short sometimes. So you can't just pull in your car anyway and run the cable around to the far side. You got to worry about where the charge port is on your car versus where the dispenser is. So let's go to the next one. Things are getting better, though. They're one of the places I subscribe to is a guy that does database analysis. He talks about the new stations sited under construction and whatever. And there are new stations coming online all the time. A lot of them seem to be on the East Coast, which doesn't do me a lot of good. But a lot of this is to do with NEVI, which is the I forget what the N stands for. Anyway, it's EV charging infrastructure. National EV Infrastructure Act. And this was signed by Biden, I think in his first year in office. But the whole structure was set up to be a little bit bureaucratic. So each state had to identify locations along their major travel routes, and get that signed off by the feds, and then they had to release bids to people to, request for bids, and then people had to bid on it, and then you get the environmental report. So it's taken a while, but they are now actually this year coming online. And the goal on that is to have chargers, fast chargers with high reliability every 60 miles along the major traveled routes. And so that's going to make a big difference for EV road trips. And then everyone is now moving over to this NACS charging, which again is Tesla called the North American Charging Standard. The standards body is calling it a charging system. That's going to help a little bit from a couple of points of view. One is that it is actually a better connector than the CCS connector that we've been using. You don't have to hit it exactly in. It kind of guides its way in. And they're also kind of set up to force people to start implementing the plug-in charge, which means that you don't have to worry about having apps for everything. You can just roll up and plug in. So over the next few years, things are going to be getting better. Okay, and then we get to how much it costs. And we've had free charging sessions, and we've had very expensive ones. Some businesses will try to bring in people with EVs or plug-in hybrids by having some free charging. The Target, I haven't actually checked this last year, but I know a while back, in San Clemente has a few charge point chargers off on the side of the parking lot, first half hour free. Would you rather go get a half hour's worth of free electricity while you shop at Target, or are you going to go down the street to Walmart? So, it could be a competitive advantage in some regards. And I notice municipalities will often put in free, not free necessarily, but relatively inexpensive level 2 charging. We used that in Ventura on a recent trip. We actually used a fairly inexpensive DC fast charger run by the city of Kanab in Utah on our trip to the north rim of the Grand Canyon. But generally, DC fast charging, which some people call level 3, costs about the same per gallon as gas for a car. So I think next slide's a table on this. Yeah. So we have a couple of comparisons. We have our home where we have solar, and we've been grandfathered into net metering too. And by my calculation, our average cost over a year, we get more solar in summer than in winter and things like that. But our cost over the year works out to about 5 cents per kilowatt. And that's about 1.5 pennies per mile. my local gas station, when I rode up the slide, was charging $5.09 a gallon for gas. So in order to have a gas car get the same cost per mile as my EV when I drive around town, that gas car would have to get 326 miles per gallon. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, we have a cabin that's up in the Southern California Edison terrain. Their pricing structure is different, and we don't have solar up there. That one, over the course of years, has been costing me about 28 cents per kilowatt hour, or just under 9 cents per mile. And that would be the equivalent of a car like mine getting 58 miles per gallon. I don't know that, I think to get that kind of mileage, I'd need to have a bit smaller car that's more aerodynamic. Okay? And I took a look at all the DC fast charging we did on all of our trips. And the average cost was 45 cents a kilowatt hour. You notice how big a difference it is? There's a factor of 7 to 1 between home charging and road charging. For that, it'd be the equivalent of a car that got about 36 miles per gallon. And the most expensive we did was a EV Go station, and that was 71 cents per kilowatt hour, and that'd be about the equivalent of 23 miles per gallon if you had a gas car in terms of your fuel costs. So you can see that road trips are a bit more expensive than around town. And so far, our total to date has, we would have had to have a car with an equivalent mileage of about 156 to have the same cost per mile for fuel. So that's, I think, pretty good. Okay, next slide. Okay, and all of us have kind of pointed out how confusing things can be, and of course there's an app for that. There's always an app for that. The two that I would say any EV owner needs today, one's called PlugShare, and basically it's mostly crowdsourced. They have a listing of essentially every charger around, and you can filter whether or not it's, you know, if you got a Tesla plug or whatever kind of plug you have in your car, and you can say what kind of chargers you're interested in, whatever. And it will show you the chargers that meet those criteria, and then you can click on the location, and you'll have reports from people who've charged there, who's saying, it was good, it was bad, took me 4 times to get the charger going, or no problems at all, or whatever. So you kind of get a feeling for, is this a good place that I want to stop at on a road trip? Here again, road trip. At home, I'm charging at home. And the other one is a better route planner. And I thought I didn't want to do an actual live demo because live demos in a meeting are fraught with error. But I did a screen capture. If we go to the next slide. And I did a trip, assuming we're starting here at the Murray Center. And we like, before we had the cabin, to go up to Mammoth a lot and stay at the Tamarack Lodge. And when you plan a trip, especially if it's a desert camping trip, you don't want to plan the trip to the desert. You want to plan the round trip because you don't want to end up with only 10% at your campsite and have no way to get home. So I always do these as round trip planning. And this is kind of what I did when we were looking for what kind of car to buy. I knew we wanted to visit the family house in Arizona. I knew we'd like to go to Yosemite. We'd like to maybe visit Colorado. So I had a list of about 6 trips, you know, camping in Joshua Tree, camping in Anza Borrego, that I wanted to do and say, how will our prospective EV do for that trip? And so I think it's a good tool when you're shopping for cars, because you can go in here and you can select any EV made anywhere in the world and say, what would it do on this trip? So for this one, we're starting here at the Murray Center. We're going up to Mammoth Lakes, and then we're coming back down. Next slide. So a better route planner looks at the current weather, and it will actually change numbers. So if you run this on a different day, you're going to get different results. But I put in our car, a Tesla long range, because that seems to be one of the more popular EVs around, Carl's Mustang, and Ed's EV Bolt. And what I found was the number of charges are a little bit different. The Mustang doesn't go quite as far on a charge. Oh, and the default for a better route planner is fastest overall. You can set it for fewer, longer charges, which I actually do when I do my own planning, because as long as I'm going to stop, I might as well get as much gas as I can. So in this case, we would spend on the round trip about an hour for charging. Total.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay? The Model Y is about the same, really, 5 or 10 minutes. That's within the error of this tool. About an hour. The Mustang is going to take twice as long because it's a slower charging car and it has to stop a little bit more often. The Bolt is yet a slower charging car. So you can see that there's going to be almost 2.5 hours longer charging than our car. So this is something, if you're planning on road tripping the car, not just using it as a city car, you probably want to look at this for the cars that you think will meet your needs otherwise. And I don't think this is really obvious to everyone who's shopping for a car the first time. And I think that's the end of my selection. Yes. Let me switch over to the camera view over here so that we can get online. I don't know. You know what? I think it was on here. Okay. Yeah, transition out. There we go. Oops, we lost part of our sign. I hadn't noticed. I'd like to invite Carl and Ed back up here. And Leslie, turn on the other microphone for people from the audience to ask questions. And we're ready to field questions from people. And Leslie, is the microphone on?
This is taking advantage of Todd's projecting the future. The route planner sounds really helpful to help compare what you're going to do. Do you anticipate those numbers will change 2 years from now? Or, how fast are the charging networks and things that actually change? I know you don't really know, but that route planner seems to be projecting, what it knows right now.
Yes, it's
And
going
so a
off
year
of
from now, it could look better.
the better route planner. The question, I'm hoping your microphone's on, so
okay.
everyone heard that online. The better route planner goes on current. It will have a number on there with digits.
It has the number on there, but
Okay,
it's not.
you're online then. Okay. A better route planner works on the current information. And it may tell you that, you have to go 300 miles around the long way because you can't go the short way today. When other charging stations come online, then it may give you a shorter route. But your car's not going to change. So if you can come up with a good route today, it'll be a good route tomorrow.
But I'd like to add something to this, and that is that batteries are becoming more efficient. They're becoming lighter, and they will be able to hold more energy.
Yeah, that is a good point. Any car, batteries, the whole technology is evolving rather rapidly. And the car that you'll be able to buy in, say, 5 years is likely to have a much faster charging speed and a much longer range than the cars that are available today. If you're looking to get into a cheap EV, though, used ones are actually pretty cheap. And part of that is because Hertz made a big mistake, and they went all in on putting in Teslas for rent, but they didn't put in charging stations, so they rented these cars not fully charged to people who didn't know how to do charging. So if you want to, how could that possibly have gone wrong? Anyway, so they dumped all of their EVs, which are mostly Teslas, I don't know if they're 3s or Ys, on the market, which depressed the whole EV used market.
A word of caution, though. The best new batteries are all made in China. And they were just hit with huge tariffs in the United States.
I think we'll see more of the 350 kilowatt chargers. I think many of the
I think Debbie requires it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
At least 250, if not
Yeah.
300. Yes?
Thank you so much. This has been really informative. So I heard that we're changing the tires more frequently, but what are the other maintenance, routine maintenance things that are required, and is it about the same as an ICE car or different?
It is substantially different. Actually, I'm going to take issue with the tires. The reason why tires wear out faster, a little bit's due to weight. The EVs are typically heavier, but a lot of them is because they're fun to drive and people accelerate rapidly. Okay?
Watch a Tesla drive
Yeah.
being driven.
Okay. The tires on our car are Michelin. We still have the original tires that apparently are rated for 55,000 miles. We have 38,000 miles on them, and we still have probably another 10,000 before I hit the wear bars. Regarding other maintenance, there's a cabin air filter. And on my car, there at 40,000 miles, there's a coolant flush. And the other stuff is rotating the tires.
Right.
There's no oil changes, there's no tune-ups, there's no, okay?
Some people talk about brakes. An electric car, you basically drive with one foot because when you take the foot off, it starts to regenerate as the car slows down. So you don't need the brake. So you may not need the brakes very often. And some people experience bad brakes because they don't use them. So you may have to have a brake job.
You got to add that. A lot of cars will have what they call one-pedal driving, where you don't even touch the brake pedal except in an emergency. In some cars, it's standard. Some cars, it's optional, and it's a button. I don't like it, so I have that disabled on mine. But they do say in my owner's manual that once a month, you needed to put it in zero regen and use the brakes, simply to keep them from rusting up. Okay? So, yeah, same thing. So basically, your maintenance is the coolant in the cooling system, because the batteries are heated and cooled, and that's not very often. I don't know what the other manufacturer's time is. Replacing the tires and rotating the tires, and replacing the cabin air filter occasionally. So very little.
Now, by the way, this fact that you don't need to go to the shop very often is a reason why dealers don't like electric cars. Their service department will dry up. No, and all the other companies that repair cars don't, not body shops, but everybody else. And so that industry feels they're going to lose jobs, so they're against it.
I thought I'd just mention, after 3 years, I haven't had to pay any money to a Ford dealer yet. Everything's been under warranty.
Yeah.
And I'm rotating my tires at Discount Tire, so, because I'm not going to pay Ford to rotate tires when I can get it done for free.
Oh, because you bought the tires at discount?
No, I just, Discount Tire will do a free rotation on any tire.
So does America's Tire.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a couple questions. Ed, do you have a Volt,
Have a what?
a Chevy Volt?
Yeah, EUV, which is a slightly larger one, and has a slightly shorter range.
What about the batteries? Because I know that they were actually banned from my apartment complex because of fire issues.
May I address that?
Well, yeah.
Okay, as pointed out in Ed's slides, EVs actually burn less often than internal combustion engine cars. So the actual threat of fire is less. That said, when GM and some others were getting their first cars out, there were manufacturing defects that led to some problems. And those have basically been taken care of by improved manufacturing. So the threat of a fire from a EV is much less than that of a gas car. But there's a significant amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's being sown. So places like, some parking garage owners and stuff are paranoid about it, unreasonably. If they wanted to ban the dangerous cars, they'd ban the internal combustion ones.
And I have another question.
Okay.
Actually, a couple more. Since I do live in an apartment complex, I don't have ready access to a means of charging an EV. And kind of basically, for somebody who's really not knowledgeable about this, what's the difference with a plug-in hybrid versus a hybrid?
A plug-in hybrid actually has a place you can plug in
Mm-hmm.
and can usually go a certain number of miles before the gasoline motor turns on. For instance, our old car was a plug-in Prius Prime, and it had about a 25-mile range, and it used the standard level 2 connector for charging. In fact, I got my charger for it before I got the EV. So it uses the same level 2 charger as a regular EV. And depending on the make, model, and year of plug-in hybrid, you can drive a certain distance before the gas engine kicks in. And if your local driving is less than that on average, then you could be in EV mode most of the time.
Thank you. Somebody else have a question?
Yeah, pass the microphone over.
I have been concerned about the lack of charging stations, so you made me feel better about understanding what's out there. At some point in Tustin, I witnessed a fight about charging, that someone was, well, they had plugged their car in and then walked away. And someone came back and blah, 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 blah. And so have you seen that in terms of experience that? Or the other thing someone mentioned is the someone who's parked their car at the charger without realizing they can't get the cable to the car. So then they have to fiddle around, and it slows everyone down. And so,
Yeah, I can certainly understand the frustration that would be involved in that. I haven't actually seen that, but I can believe it would be possible. The public charging experience is not as fast as a public gas station experience. And especially if you're on a road trip, you kind of want to get to wherever you want to go. So things that slow down the already slow situation can be annoying. But usually I've seen, like, the worst case is that South Premium Outlets in Vegas is, for me, that's the worst place. I've been there a couple of times, and it's been bad each time. But what happens is you kind of look around and you figure out what the other EVs are, and it's kind of obvious if they're waiting, and you just sort of start your way and you wait in line. And it usually works out. It just is a long time to wait. But if you plug your car in and go into the store and your car's done charging in 15 minutes, but you're in the store for 45 minutes, there are going to be people who are going to be upset with you when you come back out. That's just the way it is right now.
Well, there's another issue, which is that the whole system is designed to charge cars to 80%, because after 80%, the charging rate slows down. And so this happens on every road trip that I've been on, where somebody is charging, and you will look at their charger, and you can see that they're at 92%, and you're waiting to charge, and they're, just sitting there taking their sweet time to let it charge slowly to get another % or two of, and that can be very irritating.
I can add something to our experience on road trips when we've pulled into public charging stations, in general, I would say that people have been very friendly and very good about keeping track of who is where in the line. And so, the other things that you've mentioned are true, but at the same time, I think that people have tended to be very helpful in ways that they can be.
Yeah, and it's simply unreliable very often. When we go visit our son in Northern California, our first stop is in Bakersfield to charge. And there's usually a gaggle of people that say, okay, I'm number 5 and I'm the last one, so you'll be number 6. And it's very, so you go into the restaurant, and it's a station where there are 2 restaurants, I think. But you don't know when you have to come out again, because sometimes they charge faster because they only go to 80% and then leave, and somebody else takes longer. And then when I'm connected, I'm going back to every 20 minutes because I've had a situation where the charger would stop and says, connection interrupted, ciao. And I sit there for 20 minutes. But usually when that happens, that station, that charger will not work anymore. It's gone.
Right.
And so it may happen to somebody else, and then the waits get longer. And so I think the people that you encounter in these charging situations, we're all early adapters, and therefore we accept it. But if somebody is used to go to a gas station, it's absolutely unacceptable. And the slowness at which this is being rolled out is just terrible.
Well, I wanted to echo what Helen said. I think I've noticed quite a camaraderie among EV drivers, and people have been very friendly, and you end up getting into conversations and comparing notes and stuff. I've enjoyed the people I've talked to at charging stations.
Yeah, and I wanted to add something. In one of these conversations, I talked to a salesman, and he has had his, I think it was a German electric car, I forget which one. And he said he's had it for 2 years, and he said he saves so much on gas that the savings pays for the payment for the car and the electricity. So it is, particularly for somebody who drives a lot, enormously less costly to have an electric car. And even with charging at public stations.
Yeah, getting back to the wait time at public stations, when you think about it, how often do you go to a gas station? Once a week? Once a month? If you're commuting to work, it's probably at least once a week, right? How long does it take, going a little bit out of your way to your local gas station and filling the tank? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Okay. And you do that, say, once a week. So that's 500 minutes a year, right? Now, how many road trips do you take per year? You've just got 500 minutes is what, 8 hours? So if you have a reasonably fast charging car and you only take 1 or 2 road trips a year, you may spend that many hours, at the charger. But overall per year, you may not be spending as much time.
And I'd like to get back to Sharon's situation, living in an apartment. That is still a huge problem, and I think the solution will probably come first with having chargers at the workplace. Because there you are also for 8 hours, and with charging costs with SCE, it tends to be during the day is the lowest, whereas with San Diego Gas and Electric, seems to be in the middle of the night. So it depends on who your provider is. But it's probably going to be easier for companies to have chargers to make it attractive to the employees rather than to an apartment building owner to put chargers downstairs in the parking lot or wherever it is. But it is a problem, and I think there is legislation going on in Sacramento to encourage multiple unit owners to put in chargers. But this is a huge problem because as long as the electric car is a toy for people with sufficient money, it's not becoming as popular as it ought to be. And so we definitely need more chargers and at work. And at work, it could be for free. And something else, as Todd mentioned, the problem with placing the chargers is to get the juice to that place, the high voltage. And that's why you find them very often at Walmarts, because in those big buildings, they do have that kind of electricity, and other companies. So if you combine it with a bigger shopping trip, that may be something, if you have a fast charging car, that could fill your car while you shop. Keep Walmart in mind. They tend to have chargers. And the last comment, driving in Europe, we noticed on the freeway, the Autobahn or the Autostrada, signs, EV charger. That seems to be too complicated for Americans to install.
Oh, one more item on home charging. California requires any new construction to have the infrastructure for charging. So if you build a new single-family house or an apartment building now, you're required to have EV charging in it. And there is some legislation out there to give incentives to owners of existing units to put chargers in. But I don't know if the incentives are sufficient to actually get people off. I view it kind of like if you were sometime in the 1960s looking for an apartment, the newer ones probably had air conditioning and the old ones didn't. But the old ones, except maybe at the beach where nobody put air conditioning in. But if you lived a little ways inland, you know, the old ones started getting retrofitted with air conditioning when it turned out that they needed it to rent to people. So I think it'll be that kind of a thing too. So, John?
I'm sorry, I have one more odd trivia question. How do they do sitting there being ignored? We are occasionally leaving our car alone for 2 months. Do you leave
Oh,
it plugged in? Does it hold charge?
The main batteries, yeah, the main batteries on these all have disconnects on them internally. So when they're off, the main battery is disconnected. And they can hold their charge for 6 months or a year. The 12-volt battery, all of these cars have a 12-volt battery in addition to the big battery. And the 12-volt battery does things like runs the air conditioning blower, the radio, the lights, all the driver convenience, power seats, and things like the electronic keyless door locks. So the car will be sitting there the entire time trying to find your key, and it will run down the 12-volt battery. For many of the cars, I can't say all of them, they will wake up the high voltage battery for a while to recharge the 12 volts. And for my model car, there are reports that people have left their car for 6 months, and when they came back, it was about 2% lower than they left it. So if you start off with charge to 80% and you don't want to go below 20, that's 60 times, that's probably 5-10 years. You can leave the car parked.
That's a reasonable question. I think about
I know.
battery devices
Yeah.
and leaving something charged.
Well, it turns out we had more of a problem on our Prius, which did not have the 12-volt top-up on it. And for those cars, I ended up putting trickle chargers on them when we left home. But I haven't had to do that for the EV because it has the automatic top-up. Sharon has another question. One question which we didn't touch, and that's how long the battery's going to last. And the current batteries are either nickel metal, nickel manganese cobalt, imminency, whatever that stands for, or lithium iron phosphate. The low-end Teslas are lithium iron phosphate. The typical NMC batteries are rated for 1,000 full cycles. So you can take that EPA range and multiply it by 1,000 to get the lifetime of the battery. And here's where the manufacturers cheat. The question is, how much degradation do they allow in that 1,000 cycles? It seems the lowest is about 70% of original. But that means that you're going to go for 250,000 miles before the battery needs recharging on that or refreshing on that, if it's an NMC. If it's a lithium ion phosphate, you're more like 1,000,000 miles.
My battery has an 8-year warranty on it, and so the question for me is, do I want to risk owning my car after there's no longer a warranty on the battery? And probably not.
Well, and actually, it's longer than that because you're in California.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, California is 10 years, 150,000 miles. Okay, And California is rolling out a requirement on what percentages of degradation is considered acceptable. And I believe for the 2026 model years, it's 70%, and for 2 years after that, it's 80%. But, so that's one way that a manufacturer can currently get around, oh yeah, we're fine, it lasted 100 million miles, but you only have 2% capacity. They're getting rid of that loophole on that. They're going to specify both the amount of degradation and how long. For what it's worth, we've got 38,000 miles on our car. I plugged in the diagnostic and asked it what the state of the health of the battery is, and we are at 99.6. So assuming it's linear, from what I've read, it's normally faster at the beginning and then it tapers off. But if it's linear, we're good for 1 million miles.
My other question had to do, you mentioned weather having an impact on range. And I know that you all do go to the mountains a lot. And there was a lot of reporting during the winter, particularly back east, about EVs not doing well in cold weather. But what level of degradation have you really seen?
I don't know the exact number on that. I know more view it as I just allow for about 20 miles less range in winter. There was a bad situation with Tesla in Chicago this year. And that's probably the one you're thinking of because that hit all the national news. And I read some postmortems on that. And there were a confluence of things that came together. One of which was Tesla had a back-end software issue. Their cars normally, when the guy says, I need to charge, directs them to the nearest location that has available chargers. In this case, their back-end software failed and they were directing them all to the same location. Okay? And then the next thing is, a lot of these were the Lyft and Uber drivers that were relatively new to this. And they had the lower range Teslas with the lithium iron phosphate batteries, which do not charge when they're below freezing. So the first thing the charger has to do is put a little bit of current in there to run the battery heaters. So you plug the car in and it doesn't look like it's charging. So you go unplug and go to the next one and plug it in and it doesn't look like it's charging. And then, multiply that by a very, very overcrowded location. It really turned out to be 1 or 2 locations in Chicago that had that problem. It was a combination of the drivers not realizing that they had to leave their car plugged in to warm the battery up, and then the fact that Tesla was sending everyone in the Chicago area to that one location.
Yeah, and I would like to add something to this. The press, the media, if it bleeds, it leads. So something will really be in the paper. If there's no problem, that doesn't make a headline. And I just had something else that I wanted to add. When you're at an intermediate school or at the elementary school, when school starts, and particularly when school ends, there are 20 cars with the moms waiting in their big SUVs, idling. If they were an electric car, you cannot idle in an electric car. If you stop, the engine turns off. So that also makes the air much better than all this idling going on, or at the traffic light for that matter.
Yeah. Okay. I just realized that we're running a little bit long here, so we probably want to wrap it up. Is there any more questions? No? Again, a reminder, there's a hike tomorrow, 9 o'clock at the Old Corral area, back of Casper's, and we'll figure out the route based on how full the creeks are. But thank you all for coming, and if you have any more questions, I'm sure we can be emailed, and we'll be more than willing to talk your ear off. And based on some of this, perhaps what you want to do is talk to our spouses about the other view of the car.
Helen didn't speak, but she doesn't like the car as much as I do. And, well, since we're going a little over, I want to mention something too. Electric cars are really computers on wheels. So if you don't like handling the screen and so forth, and different screens to find out information, that is also a much more higher, bigger learning curve than with a gas car.
No, it is not the learning curve. These are distance glasses. If I want to, yeah, if I want to drive, I have to wear my distance glasses. I have a pair of reading glasses at home. If I wanted to see the screen, I would need my reading glasses.
Right.
There's no learning curve involved. It's a physical impossibility. So what I appreciated on the old gas car was that, you know, for instance, listening to the radio, there were certain set buttons for stations, so I knew by touch. I didn't have to look at it. Well, when all you've got is a screen with images, you gotta look at it. And then you get a message on the screen, do not take your eyes off the road.
Okay.
This is really brilliant.
Actually, a lot. Yeah. And I'm going to have to say that's not an EV problem, although EVs probably have it worse. That's just a new car problem. A lot of new cars, it's cheaper to put one touchscreen in than a lot of buttons. So if you want a car with buttons, you definitely need to shop around, and you definitely have to make the marketing people realize that that's an important enough thing that they'll build cars that way. So, yes. And basically, all cars are computers on wheels nowadays. Okay, thank you very, very much.